How many of you support taking out a
we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. It's disrespectful. Do you have a question for me?
Okay, I'm sorry. You brought them up here, and it is a
Do you have a question for me? You know what a better question would be? What are you willing to do with your power to ensure that a school district that stuffed black children in Willis wagons, what you should be asking me is, what are you willing to do when you had a district that have laid off black women?
I'm going to ask my own questions. Thank you.
To some, it may look like a coup by the CTU to get rid of the board members who would not do your bidding and fire Pedro Martinez. Can you respond to that?
What's the question?
Well, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson made an absolute mockery out of a press conference this week in which he refused to answer absolutely valid budget-related questions from journalists and also engaged in Trump-like hostility toward reporters for asking him valid questions. Now, look, there's been a lot of turmoil in Chicago for various reasons. The city, for instance, is projected to have a nearly $1 billion budget shortfall for the 2025 fiscal year. That is no joke. And I want to make it clear, when it comes to local politics, fiscal issues can't be dealt with the way fiscal issues are dealt with on a national level. On a national level, you have the Federal Reserve printing money. That's not the case for cities or states. They really do have to balance the budget. And so these are incredibly valid questions, because if you don't answer them, people are going to wonder, well, where are we going to start seeing the cuts to close that budget gap? And he's just unwilling to answer those questions. Now, the city's deficit shot up 80% since Johnson's first year as mayor in just a few years. Okay, like 2023 was when he came into power. And at the same time, Chicago needs to make a $175 million payment to the non-teacher employee fund for Chicago public schools. And the Chicago Teachers Union is currently in contract negotiations with educators demanding a 10% salary increase. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of demands being made. And what's unfortunate is that this is one of the rare stories where you have a mayor who, in my opinion, has been corrupted by money, not from corporations, but from the teachers union, and is making decisions, in my opinion, that could potentially lead to school closures and all sorts of terrible outcomes in the future. And so, what Johnson wants to do in order to close that budget gap is get the school district to take out a $300,000 short-term high-interest loan. And that doesn't sound like a great idea for those who are looking to, stop digging Chicago into a major hole. And because of these fiscal issues, again, you have no possibility of a low interest loan. They can only be approved for a high interest loan. So the cost of borrowing the money is going to be high. And the loan would both fund the pension and give the teachers the 10% raise that they're asking for. Now, look, I want to be clear. I am overall and in general in favor of paying teachers more. I have a long record of that, and I have not changed my mind on that. However, you can't do it if the economic fundamentals in the city don't make sense for it, because that could end up causing more harm than good. That could lead to school closures, which should be avoided. That would mean that teachers would end up getting fired. So this is all to say that it informed the decision made by the CEO of Chicago Public Schools. His name is Pedro Martinez. He refused to take out the loan. He said that it was fiscally irresponsible. And in this particular case, I happen to agree with him, even though I would love to see the teachers make more money. Absolutely. Now, the only other way to oust, since Martinez said, no, I don't think this is a good idea. As the head of Chicago Public Schools, I refuse to take out this high interest, short-term $300,000 loan. Instead, what I would like to do is balance the budget. And he created his own budget. The budget was meant to avoid school closures at least through 2027. So no schools would have to worry about closing. if the city ended up following his budget for Chicago public schools. And all of this ended up drawing the ire of Mayor Brandon Johnson. He got upset that he didn't get his way and that the CEO of Chicago Public Schools pushed back on the notion of taking out this, high interest loan. And so since then, Mayor Johnson has been pushing him to resign. When Pedro Martinez refused to resign, well, the only other way to oust him is to get the school board to get rid of him. And keep in mind, the school board was handpicked by Mayor Brandon Johnson himself. But they did not want to oust Pedro Martinez. In fact, they held a vote. And I want to talk a little bit about that vote because they voted on two things. Let's take a look. The board had voted 7-0 to approve Martinez's budget plan, which would prevent school closures through 2027, as I said. They also held a vote on Johnson's desired $300 million loan and unanimously rejected it. So the CEO, Pedro Martinez, put out a budget. The entire board agreed with it, unanimous. They also held the vote on the possibility of taking out this loan. They totally sided with Martinez, did not think that the loan was a good idea, unanimously rejected it. But Johnson persisted. All 7 members of the school board, which Johnson handpicked, ended up resigning in protest because of his pressure campaign to oust Martinez. They're like, we don't want to oust Martinez, but he was relentless in the pressure campaign. And then finally, like, we can't take this anymore. We're going to resign. But that caused a new problem. The new problem is, well, if they resign, well, that allows for Mayor Johnson to handpick and appoint a new slate of school board members. And that gives him the opportunity to handpick or install puppets. And now we don't know if that's exactly what he did, but he has already appointed 6 out of the 7 school board members. The 7th school board member actually happened to be a holdover from Lori Lightfoot's administration. But the whole reason why there was this big press conference this week was because reporters wanted to know, okay, well, have these school board members that you just appointed, the interim school board members, have they been vetted? Are they loyalists? What do they think about the possibility of taking out an expensive, $300 million loan? Like, what's going on? And look, those are legitimate questions. Those are the kinds of questions journalists should be asking. But Brandon Johnson was not interested in any of that. Now, who is he beholden to? Well, let's take a look. Data from watchdog group Illinois Sunshine found that between December 4th of 2017 and June 30th of 2023, Johnson's political committee received $6.07 million from the Chicago Teachers Union, which he used to be a member of. And look, the unions get to play ball too. Unions have their own funds, they engage in lobbying. And again, usually unions are asking for things that I totally agree with. But considering the financial woes that the city of Chicago is currently dealing with, I just feel like a 10% raise that we don't have any way of paying for at this time, other than taking out a massive loan, would be devastating to the city and would have all sorts of consequences that the city would not take kindly to. Now, let's get to the reporters and let's get to their valid questions being shut down. Because regardless of how you feel about what Johnson is trying to do here with that, high interest loan, you have to agree that treating reporters who have valid questions the way that he did at this press conference is pretty unacceptable. I mean, just switch out Brandon Johnson with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump, of course, got a ton of criticism for the way he treated journalists. Now tell me that this is any different. Let's go to the first video.
To the outside world, this kind of does look like, because the CTU was your biggest backer, to some it may look like a coup by the CTU to get rid of the board members who would not do your bidding and fire Pedro Martinez. Can you respond to that?
What's the question?
The question is, this looks like a coup by the CTU to get rid of Pedro Martinez. Was there collaboration with the CTU on your part to make this happen so that you could fire Pedro Martinez?
So every single mayor in the history of Chicago has had the authority to appoint board members to multiple boards. Guess who still has that authority? This mayor does.
Okay, congratulations. That is true, but that doesn't answer the question. The question wasn't about whether or not Brandon Johnson has the authority to handpick and appoint the new school board or the interim school board. And by the way, in a few weeks, the people of Chicago will be able to vote on 10 new members of the school board, and Brandon Johnson will be able to appoint 11 members. This was Johnson's way of making the whole situation a little more democratic, except it's not real democratic when you're shutting down journalists like this and refusing to answer their legitimate questions. I mean, did you vet these people? Who are they? Why did you pick them? And already, according to NBC News, one of his appointees has a history that's concerning. So the person that I'm talking about here had Mitchell is his last name, but he had basically been disbarred in the state of Ohio back in the 90s. He had a lien placed on his home because he refused to pay child support. That was later lifted. And then he had another lien placed on his home when he refused to pay his water bill, which whatever, I don't care about that in typical situations. But we're talking about an individual who's been appointed to make decisions about potentially taking out a massive loan that the entire city of Chicago is gonna have to deal with. I don't know, it doesn't seem like he's someone who makes great decisions or is fiscally responsible, but who knows? So look, again, these are legitimate questions that journalists should be able to ask. And I would appreciate if the mayor, regardless of who he is or what political affiliation he has, answers. But again, that's not the case. He also seemed particularly snippy with a female reporter who wanted to know where the board members stood on the idea of taking out the loan.
I'm wondering if any of the board members can answer this question. Actually, if all of you can, just maybe even just a show of your hands. How many of you support taking out a
No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
For a teacher's contract?
If you have a question for the mayor of Chicago, you can ask me a question. What you are not going to do is litigate what the board has the authority to do once they're appointed. You can ask that once they are appointed. No. I'm not going to do it. It's disrespectful.
So obviously that reporter wanted to know, hey, did you install interim board members who agree with you on taking out this high interest $300 million loan? And he doesn't want that to be answered. And look, watch this video through the end. Hopefully you're watching this entire report through the end. But he then went on to dictate which questions they should be asking him, which questions journalists should be asking the politician. Take a look.
Do you have a question for me?
Okay, I'm sorry, you brought them up here and it is a
Do you have a question for me? Ask me the question.
Okay.
Ask me if I support, I'm gonna help you out.
Yeah.
Ask me the question if I believe that we should invest in our children and make sure we don't lay off brown and black women. Yes. Yes. I'm not gonna tolerate cuts. That's what the issue has been in this city. You know what a better question would be? What are you willing to do with your power to ensure that a school district that stuffed black children in Willis wagons? What you should be asking me is, what are you willing to do where you had a district that have laid off black women? You should be asking me, what am I prepared and willing to do to ensure that our children get the education that they deserve? Anything necessary.
I'm gonna ask my own questions. Thank you.
I gotta say, that video was infuriating until that hilarious, snarky comeback by the journalist who's just like, yeah, I'm gonna ask my own questions, okay? And besides which, the whole diatribe that you heard there wasn't just in regard to answering this one reporter. He deflected by bringing up slavery over and over and over again. In fact, he argued that not going along with his plan is similar to what like slave owners were arguing when it came to freeing the slaves, which is, guys, come on. That deflection is ridiculous, and he should answer questions about what he is currently doing to the city of Chicago, because the ramifications of his decisions will be felt by every governmental department, by every resident and taxpayer in the city. And speaking of taxpayers, I should note that while he said in the video that we just heard that he is against cuts, after the press conference, he proposed cuts. I'll get to that in a minute. But I do want to go to one more video because a question that he should definitely answer is how he is personally using public funds. Now, this reporter, a Latina, wanted to ask about an upcoming trip and who's paying for that upcoming trip. Let's take a look.
Mayor, is this a good week to go to London for a Bears game? And also, who's going to pay for that trip?
All right. Okay. All right. I'm going to London to attract business to Chicago. Okay? I'm going to London to attract business in Chicago.
But are you going to the game?
Hold on a second. Because you already know the answer to that. But I just want to make sure that you do the people of Chicago service. Because I have to be very honest with you. It's pretty jacked up the way you framed that.
Right.
That is. It is. It's disrespectful and condescending that the black man is going to London for a game. It's disrespectful. It is.
No, it's not disrespectful. It's a completely valid question about the use of public money. And look, I don't know if he's actually going to London to attract business to Chicago. I'm skeptical. But the notion that simply asking that question and asking who pays for that trip, like being disrespectful or racist against the black man, that is insane. That is insane. That is insane. It really does remind me of Eric Adams when the housing advocate had asked about rent control, and he immediately accused her of being racist because she was asking a question that made him uncomfortable. You guys have decided to be public servants, and you should get no special treatment based on the color of your skin. You signed up for this. You should answer questions, not because they are beholden to reporters, but because they have a responsibility to the residents of Chicago from all races, from all nationalities, from all faiths. There's a lot of focus on, he represents everybody in Chicago. He needs to understand that. And he seems to miss that point. And let's talk about what happened after the fact. So after the press conference, reporters couldn't get him to respond to a damn email, a request for comment. There was one local station that he sat down with and had an interview, and he just repeated much of the same. It was a very friendly interview as well. Now, what is Johnson planning to do? Well, we have no idea whether the board is going to go along with his plan. I would venture to say, I would take an educated guess that he's not going to appoint people who disagree with him on that matter. So we'll see what happens. Right now, though, district personnel layoffs and cuts to police trainings are being proposed by Mayor Johnson to cut down the budget gap. So it's not just, first of all, cutting back on police trainings is such a bad idea, but put that aside. He's talking about laying off personnel within the school district. And he's proposing that immediately after the press conference where he said, I don't want cuts. I'm not going to do cuts. No, you're going to do cuts because you guys don't have the money. So how does it make any sense to make the matter worse by taking out a $300 million high interest loan? He's also considering property tax increases and the possible refinancing. I think this is actually a good idea. The possible refinancing of the city's debt, which could save Chicago $110 million upon city council approval. And by the way, city council is not happy with him. Even some of his allies in the city council are not happy with him, and they're currently making moves to ensure that in the future, the mayor's appointments must be approved by the city council. We'll see if that goes anywhere. But the final thing that I'll bring up is that the Chicago Teachers Union is also demanding that resources that were allocated to incentivize the development of more housing should be redirected to the school district. Look, we will see what happens, but this is how things tend to work out when you have, a budget shortfall. When you have a budget shortfall, what local leaders have to do is make decisions about what they cut. Okay, which bills do we absolutely have to pay? And again, in my opinion, making the matter worse by taking out a high interest loan, that could lead to future school closures. That could lead to more teacher layoffs. It's not a good idea. And seeing Brandon Johnson have a power trip like this is really disturbing. But here we are.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below, because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.